everybody can do this, from like, I've had kindergartners make friction fires to grandparents making friction fires, and these skills are something that's in all of our DNA. And we don't have to be like an athlete to be able to accomplish things like foraging some edible plants and berries, or building a shelter that keeps you warm and comfortable, or making a fire from friction. Folks find it super inspiring when they realize that they are capable.
Welcome to the Tracking Connections podcast, and thanks for listening.
We feature voices from around the world, sharing stories of working intentionally with deep nature connection in ways that transform lives, families, projects, and communities. I'm Sarah.
I'm Aiden.
And I'm Jon.
And we are your hosts from Living Connection First.
Hey everyone, Sarah here.
Hey everybody, this is Aiden, and I'm excited to be joined today by Jason Knight from Alderleaf Wilderness College, and we're going to be talking about survival skills.
Yeah, survival skills and that relationship between survival skills and the relationships we build in nature. So this is Jon, and I'm happy to welcome Jason Knight.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here today. Go way back, so it's really fun reconnecting and talking about how these amazing skills benefit our lives in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. So Jason and I go back to about 1996. Back in the day when I was mentoring a bunch of teens through the Wilderness Awareness School back in New Jersey back in the 80s. And I was working with an elder named Ingwe at the time. And Ingwe was quite a character. Really, what an amazing elder he was. And he had a lot of these quotes. And one of his quotes was, "The wilderness holds all truth and knowledge." And because I was working with a bunch of high schoolers, they came up with, "The wilderness holds more truth than college." So I think it's funny that you are from Alderleaf Wilderness College. It was Dan Gardoki who was one of those people who coined that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's just really funny. But back in the 90s, I was working a lot with Jake and Judy Swamp and Mike McDonald from the Tree of Peace Society up at Akwesasne. They were Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk people there from Akwesasne. And the reason I met them and got to know them was because of a man named Ed Miller, who I met when I was at Princeton in 1990 at the university there for an Earth Day celebration where Jake was. And Ed and I stayed in touch because Jake wanted to come down and work with us in New Jersey. So Ed was our contact for a while. So, I got to know Ed over the years. Really lovely guy, Quaker guy from that part of the world, New Jersey. And then, or maybe not, I'm not sure. But somehow he called me one day and said, "Hey, I was at a restaurant and there was this young man there. He was really so enthusiastic and he was so passionate about the things that you do, Jon. I think you should really talk to him," right? What was your experience of that, Jason? Because that was going back a few years.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky. I loved the wilderness growing up and had a neighbor that took me out, an uncle that took me out all the time, and stumbled across all kinds of wilderness skills books. I was in the Scouts, and after reading Tom's books, Tom Brown really wanted to go there, but at the time he didn't have any programs for teens. And so I found a club that was run by some folks who had been through tracker school classes and was having a great time. And I worked at like a natural foods restaurant, organic food kind of cafe place. And I remember my uncle was coming in during his lunch hour to eat lunch there when I was working the register one day. And he was asking me about when I was going down to New Jersey again for another class, because I was just turning 18. I was finally old enough to go to a Tom Brown class. And so this fellow in line behind him overheard the conversation I was having with my uncle. And so when he came to the register, he was like, "Oh, I used to live in New Jersey. I know those guys down there." And I'm like, "What, you do?" And he's like, "Yeah. I'd be happy to talk about it." And so I'd love to learn more. And so he's like, "I go walk on this beach, Good Harbor Beach, every evening with my dog, if you want to join me." So I joined him and met this fellow, Ed, who his wife was a Montessori teacher, and he worked for like the local newspaper. And so I got to know this fellow before and after I went to my first tracker school class, which was like halfway through my senior year. And then after that, I was just like, I need to find a way to study this full time. And do you know anybody? And he started listing off different people he knew. And one guy mentioned, I think, was Christoph Hagen, but he lived in Switzerland. I'm like, I don't know if I could sort out get over there to Europe. But then he told me about you, Jon, and he's like, yeah, let me reach out to my friend Jon. I think he moved out west somewhere, and said he got in touch with you, and then connected the two of us together, which was really awesome.
Yeah, I remember. And so I got on the phone with Jason and just kind of, light interview. I wasn't really trying to push him away or anything, but your enthusiasm was so over the top. I'm just like, oh, I got to help this guy, At the time, I wasn't thinking I was going to offer you a place to live or any of that. I said, you're going to have to, find a job and rent a place or whatever. But yeah, we'll be happy to work with you. And then we ended up all living together, Aiden, Jason, and Justin, because my daughters moved back east. And suddenly there was a room with 2 bunk beds. And so we stuck Jason and Justin in that room together. And you two were in competition to see who could finish the naturalist training program first. And I remember how angry you were. What is it with this number 1-8? I turn 1-8 and I have to work, but he's only 1-6 and he doesn't have to. So he could just waste his whole day and go to his sit spot anytime he wants, And then you came up with this brilliant idea, wow, I think we should start a program for adults, that we can immerse ourselves, and so that's how we got that first residential program started together. And, yeah, Jason, you've just been always so on fire, and your efforts and your diligence, your commitment, your stick-to-itiveness, your focus, your passion has just always been really inspiring. And, yeah, and you've taken that a long way. I know you've gone a long way into, well, first of all, you came out of the Kamana Naturalist Training Program, which is not a small thing. That's a good couple 2-3 year commitment. A lot of, I don't want to call it work, because people who do that program don't think of it as work. It's like a calling. Mm-hmm. But then, you went on to study with the holistic tracking program, Shikari, that we were running. And, I can see behind you on the wall all those Cyber Tracker eval certificates. So you've really taken this a long way. And, I'd love to hear about the way you developed your passion for the ancestral skills, the primitive skills, what people might call survival skills, and how, your powerful relationship with the natural world and tracking has contributed to your abilities in the ancestral arts, as well as your ability to teach them. But before I do that, I want to go to Sarah to see if she has a question.
Well, that was very close to what my question is. My question is around your upbringing in nature, having a lot of exposure to nature in what sounds like lots of different ways. So what was it that drew you to survival skills versus, say, like hunting or, backpacking or outdoor ed of other kinds?
It's hard to really trace it. I mean, I had a neighbor who took me out foraging for wild blueberries all the time, and then had the scouts, and I did a survival merit badge. I can remember doing that and staying in a shelter, making fires with flint and steel and things like that. Stumbling across the survival books was definitely an inspiration. There was a hike I did in high school that got me thinking more along these lines too, where we had gone up this huge mountain in summer and thought it was just going to be an easy hike up and down. But then the storm moved in when we were at the top, and my friend twisted his ankle and it was hailing on us, and we couldn't find the trail down. And it was getting to be a difficult situation because it was warm at the base of the mountain. So we were just in t-shirts and shorts, but it was hailing on us. We were getting soaked to the bone. And luckily we were able to eventually locate the trail after dark and then get back to the cars a little after midnight. But it was definitely a situation where it could have done us in. And there was people that perish on that mountain every year, even in the summertime. And so there's a lot of things that I guess came together and inspired me to go down this path of survival skills. And studying with Jon was amazing, and then finding all these other teachers throughout the network across the country, like through Rabbit Stick and Winter Count, and then different folks that were part of the wider network with John Young and Wilderness Awareness School and Tracker School, and working with different teachers to pick up niche things like flint napping and bow making and apprenticing with ethnobotanists and things like that. So it's definitely one of those skills where the more the better equipped you are for not just emergencies in the backcountry, but just feeling like you're part of nature, that you're not a tourist in your own backyard, that you're part of a human on Earth, and knowing that you can take care of yourself and others. And whether it's a hike or a camping trip, or just like a natural disaster rolls through your neighborhood, or something crazier happens. I think there's certainly a period of time in my upbringing where it's like, what's going to happen with all these changes happening in the world? And I think we probably all still feel that to different degrees. And I think survival skills, lead us into a desire to want to be connected to nature and be more self-reliant, but also interconnected. And I think it ultimately leads to things like permaculture, where it's like being able to grow some of your own food and capture some of your own water and energy and have a less of a footprint on the earth, so that one, we can either avoid catastrophe in the future, but two, have a better chance of weathering whatever difficulties come our way. So, but it just opens up this whole awareness that I think benefits everything in your life. If you're thinking in the minds in the sense of a survival person or a tracker or a naturalist, I think it opens up that creativity, that inner MacGyver, that resourcefulness, that helps you solve whatever challenges come up in other aspects of your life, because you start to like see the connections between things, and you're aware, you're open, you're keeping your awareness open to the potential solutions out there. And, it just, when it comes to like, say, a construction project, or, solving a problem that you're having at home with your friends or family, it's so all encompassing. It's kind of hard to separate it out sometimes, but yeah, it's just amazing skill set that we can all take in different directions.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that full lifestyle, expansiveness that survival skills can span across. And I guess I heard within that, I heard a lot of the, preparedness for emergencies and, being comfortable in nature. But I also heard you touch on that piece of feeling like you belong. Could you say more about that?
For a lot of folks, and for me, before I got into these skills, taking a walk in the woods, it's like everything's a wall of green. And when you start to know all those species, who they are, and how they benefit each other, or how they can benefit you, you start to build these relationships with the different trees and plants and animals in your environment. You start to feel like you're part of that environment too. And you see how your actions of maybe harvesting something can benefit the environment. If you're harvesting out an invasive plant, or spreading the seeds of something that's not common in your area. As humans, we can not just, a lot of outdoor organizations promote leave no trace, but we can actually go beyond that and have a regenerative or a positive trace that we leave in the environment. And then the other part of these skills is like, as you gain them, then you want to share these with others, so that other folks will see these connections and build this relationship and caring for the earth, and then so that we can have a greater effect on our future, and having positive outcomes and how we relate with the environment and interact with it, and be more sustainable. And so, like I was saying before, I think it leads to things like permaculture. It leads to things like teaching these skills with others, and but I think it's super valuable to get them yourself first, but then have two paths going on, where you share these with others while continuing your own learning. Like these tracking certificates, some of these happen more recently. Like I started tracking in the 90s, but what's so exciting is that you can never know it all. And that's a lifelong journey, and you won't even, you only still know a tiny percent by the time you pass away, but you can spend your whole life going further and picking up new aspects and elements. And it's kind of like music as a passion, right? There's always more things to learn in music, more songs, or more styles and scales and things like that. And so, yeah, I think, like I said, I think it leads to these other areas that are super helpful as well.
So, Jason, I happen to have been living in that same house in 1997. And I heard a wise man once say that the difference between mentoring and manipulation is intent. So I wonder if you could just share some stories of John Young's mentoring / manipulation of you and Justin at that time.
Oh, my.
I'll give you a little more here. One of the things that I know as a mentor, and that I've also learned, right, is that we can steer, but we can't be the engine, right? And so it's when we recognize that engine and that drive in somebody, that's when we kind of know, we can make something happen there, right? So I remember just watching how driven both of you were. And I was like 13 at the time, and I couldn't actually keep up with the two of you. I mean, you two were like properly doing the Kamana program, but I finished my entire mammals section of the resource trail in like 3 weeks because I saw what the two of you were doing, right? So I know that the drive was there. And so, yeah, if you just reflect back on like how that drive was maybe, manipulated a little bit for your own benefit.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be funny comments like Jon would be like, "Oh, Justin got 5 journals done today," like, "Oh, I'm going to stay up and get 6 done," or something like that, or there was like the wood stove challenge. So we were living in a house he had wood stove for one of its heat sources, and it was like, I think Jon at one point challenged us like to get every fire going with friction that year, and so we were doing bow drills and hand drills, and we were experimenting with fire plows and fire saws, and we were harvesting different plants and different trees and trying out all the different wood combinations, trying to figure out what was easiest or what was most available to us. And like we got tons of blisters on our hands. But when you're doing it every day, if you're starting all your wood stove fires with friction, you get very comfortable with it, where it doesn't maybe seem as hard, as intimidating as it might be to a beginner who's like trying to sort out their first friction fire. It's super helpful. And same thing with like the journaling. I know a lot of folks, they struggle to like create one journal. They'll spend like hours or days like researching and getting meticulous around the details. But it's like really, you can glean a lot through a quick perusal of field guides and just quick sketches and quick jotting down of what you looked at. And that way you can get a greater breadth of knowledge of species and not just getting bogged down in like one or two. But yeah, I mean, Justin and I definitely had a little competitive edge. He was in a teen program at the time, and in that teen program actually gave me the inspiration for the course for college age adults, and which later kind of became my calling. Like I could see that there was a lot of folks wanting to make an impact on the world and create more programs, and then there was obviously this huge need of kids across the whole country of needing nature programs in their communities. And the bottleneck that I could see is like, well, we don't have a solid like instructor training path where we can get folks the skills they need, both in nature skills and teaching skills, to get them ready to be solid instructors really quickly. And so that's why we started the first 9-month course for adults, and to get them trained up to be instructors really fast, because we had a need for more instructors at Wilderness Awareness School at the time, because our youth programs were growing explosively. But then all these other nature schools around the country, they're trying to get off the ground and just they had a need for instructors ready to teach kids. And so we just started cranking out instructors, and that also led to Alderleaf. Is like we kept growing. That I just saw this need of expanding further. And so for 20 years, I ran 9-month programs, training adults full-time for a whole school year. They could get college credit for it, and they got certificates within the program. But then a lot of them could go out and start teaching right away, or working on wildlife conservation projects with their tracking skills, or working on farms and properties utilizing their permaculture skills. But that really, I think, everyone's efforts together from the 90s, when Jon used to talk about wanting to see more nature schools and more communities, like it really, a lot of that has happened. Like back then there was a handful of schools across the whole country, and now there's like, feels like a solid 5 or 10 in most states. And it's come a long way.
That's super inspiring. I would love to hear reflections from Jon on that. How does that make you feel, hearing about that expansion, right? You knowing Jason from when he was a young man to where he is now, and what you handed to him, right? Or mentored him into, and now how many he has affected.
Yeah, that gets me every time. I remember when Ingwe said back in the 1980s, when we first got started, how difficult it was to, he and I were working with young people. We had a bunch of homeschoolers that were different ages, really from babies up until, I think Eleni at the time was 12. So she was the oldest. Then we had some high school people. We had like 5. But everybody was going on a journey, and they were having such a good time. And we were trying to grow, and it was really difficult to attract more families, more youth. And then as we did manage to attract more youth and families, we didn't have people to call on to help. So it was all on Ingwe and I. And I remember when he wrote that message to the 20th anniversary Fox Print for Wilderness Awareness School, that it seemed like this could never grow, and it seemed impossible. But we were convinced that we had to get this to every child on the earth, that was really critical. and it didn't seem possible. And when he passed away in 2005, we had already seen a lot of change. There was already a lot of good growth happening. And a lot of that had to do with exactly that pattern you're describing, Jason. Cranking out instructors, a good way to look at it. Because, the research at that time wasn't clear. I think we knew practically that a person who themselves had not gone on the nature connection journey and practiced these skills themselves was not very good at helping others. Even if they were good teachers, they didn't necessarily know how to role model or mentor that for others. But now the research is clear. I mean, it's absolutely clear. There's this one study that they compared forest school teachers who themselves were deeply nature connected to forest school teachers who weren't. They were using the same pedagogy, both groups of teachers, and then they studied the effect of those adults on the children. And the children who were with the nature connected forest school teachers were themselves nature connected, and the children who were with the forest school teachers who weren't were less nature connected or not at all. So it really shows us, the need for the adults to go on this journey themselves. Even if they missed it as kids, it's never too late. But there's a lot more here than just the skills and just the connection. There's a whole nother layer to it.
Yeah. So what's the hook? I really am so inspired by it working. So if you could do one thing or have one day with a group of people, Jason, what would you do for those people to get them hooked on survival skills?
I mean, I think it can be different things for different groups of people. It's oftentimes helpful if you're able to do a combination of things. If you had a day, I think it's getting folks together and sharing some stories, demonstrating some skills. Like friction fire is always super popular, but oftentimes getting out in the field together then is always super inspiring. If you can go out and be showing some folks some plants and trees they don't know about and what they're good for, or some tracks of animals, or explaining some bird language. If it's a combination of survival skills and tracking and naturalist skills done, ideally in the field, but if not, always with some stories infused into it. I think that the combination of those things hits different types of learners, and it really gets folks excited about the possibilities that are out there.
And that's cool. It also feels like a reflection of your experience, having your hands in many different places, not just tracking, not just wild edibles, but really doing lots of different things. It gives it that immersive experience. Jon, do you have reflections on the same question?
I do, yeah. And I just also wanted to say, that Jason played such a big role in helping us mentor adults that ended up going on to work with children. And there was numerous models that kicked off because of what we started, right? There was Wisdom of the Earth and other schools around the New England area, and then overseas in Germany and Austria. And the next thing I know, there's hundreds of these schools working with children in this way. And, I recently realized how many hundreds of thousands of children that none of us have ever met that have gone on this journey because of the efforts of people like you, Jason, and the work that we did with Ingwe all those years. But it's just so inspiring. I was working with this group from in the Northeast. I won't specify exactly what the name of the organization was or anything, but they were coming to the Pine Barrens, and they were bringing their field staff who had a lot of experience working with adjudicated youth, kids from prison, taking them on the Appalachian Trail. And they were coming to the Pine Barrens, and the director of that project got in touch with me and said, I'm concerned about the staff, that they know how to get by in the Pine Barrens, because I understand that it's really easy to get lost there. And the last thing I need is for my staff to get lost, or worse, for one of the young people that we're serving to get lost. This would be a disaster. Can you do a training for them? And so I met with them on, I had a couple of different weekend sessions with them set up. And the first weekend I met them at their facility. I had to drive a few hours north to meet them. And I spent a couple of days with them up there and just kind of assessed their skill. They were very nice. They were very competent. But they also knew that they knew everything already and that they had nothing to learn. So I called up two people, Rob and Jeff, and I asked them if they could help me because I mentored them as teens in the Pine Barrens. And I said, I got these guys that are a little bit, they know too much already. Like they're sort of arrogant, but they're nice, but they don't think they have anything to learn. I said, can you come help me set up an experience for these people? And they said, yeah. So they come down and we go and we pull out this topographic map of this Lacey track in the Pine Barrens. And we look for a place that we knew existed, but it was like 1 square mile of road. Like the roads were crossing, but they made, back from when they were plotting out the development of that site, which never happened because it became a national reserve, thankfully. But there was 1 square mile with literally a straight mile on each side, north, south, east, west. And so my plan was to line up these people on the sand road, separate them far enough so they can't hear each other. And I told them it's a very simple exercise. You're going to walk 50 steps in and turn around and walk 50 steps out. But I want you to draw a line on the sand road before you go in and put your initials. And your goal is to come back and step right out and put your initials right on the same line. Let's see how close you can get without compass, without anything else. Just go do it. Rob was on one end, Jeff was on the other, I was in the middle, and off they went. And of course, when you're walking, they don't know this, but one foot is stretching a little longer than the other, and they end up going in a quarter of a circle by the time they get out there. And then when they turn around to walk straight back, they end up going in another quarter circle, which takes them even further away. And so then they panic and they start running and, but one guy came right back out and put his line down and his initials, but it took him about 20 minutes. And he looked around and he's like, wow, I was taking my time. Am I the first one back? I said, yeah, you'll probably be the only one back. We'll be here for hours. Because I had told them, in case something goes wrong and you hit a sand road and you look left and right and don't see anybody, just go to the corner and turn left, and then go to the next corner and turn left. And eventually, if you keep doing that, you'll find me in the road. And it was hours before we saw the rest of them. Okay, so the bottom line is, when we debriefed that story with them that night, they were really clear that they really didn't know and that they had to learn, and their passion was turned on for learning. And so the next day, they were hungry to understand how the old deer hunter could walk in and walk out and get it perfect. Why couldn't they? Because they were quote unquote experienced backcountry people, right? But boy, their eyes were as big as saucers, and their commitment to learning was super high. And they got really passionate, and we had no problem training them in how not to get lost and how to loss-proof their youth when the youth finally did come down to the Pine Barrens. But you see what I'm talking about. There's a setup there, right? So from the standpoint of the participant, they had no idea that was going to happen. Do you use tools like that where, you're setting up a situation where you're going to lead them into an experience that just ignites them?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of folks don't know that they're going to make their first friction fire, at a class with us, and so suddenly when it's like after we talk about it and demo it, and then we start passing out wood and be like, all right, this is why we put carving knives on the gear list. A lot of folks are like, really? And then like, doesn't it take like a lifetime to learn how to do that? When most folks get the fire on that afternoon, and I think their minds are just blown that they're capable of like learning this skill and getting there first. Cause we set up all the supplies for them. So they've got good ideal materials to start with. And so they can finish those kits and get a fire out of them in that first afternoon. And it's like the look on people's faces is almost like that Tom Hanks on Castaway, like, oh my God, I got fire. That they could create this from basically wood, without having to have a lighter or matches. They didn't expect that was coming, and they didn't expect they were capable of that. And that's one of the things that I think prevents so many people from like starting down the path of this skill, especially adults, is they think they're not capable for some reason or another. They've either like watched a movie or seen a TV show and said like, oh, that's just for, extreme folks who are like in the military or something like that. Like I could never do that. If I was lost, I would just lay down and die. And I think that that everybody can do this, from like, I've had kindergartners make friction fires to grandparents making friction fires, and these skills are something that's in all of our DNA. And we don't have to be like an athlete to be able to accomplish things like foraging some edible plants and berries, or building a shelter that keeps you warm and comfortable, or making a fire from friction. Folks find it super inspiring when they realize that they are capable.
What's our agreed upon survival priority? Is it shelter, water, fire, food? Shelter, fire, water, food, the fire? I never know where to put fire. How do you guys like to say that?
I like shelter, water, fire, food, but fire can move up higher on the list based on the circumstances. And of course, I think any of those priorities can shift based on where you are, what resources you have with you, your specific situation. So it's more of a generalized guideline, and it kind of lines up with the biggest dangers to lost persons. Like, more lost persons perish from hypothermia than anything else, and dehydration's second. And starvation really doesn't become an issue like until much further down the line. And so I think that's what's maybe non-intuitive for some folks, is that like, I could die from hypothermia today or tonight, or that I could die from dehydration within the next few days. So that rule of threes of like, 3 hours, you could get dangerously hypothermic. 3 days, you could get dangerously dehydrated. And 3 weeks is where starvation starts to become more dangerous. But there are certain environments that might be cold and wet enough where you need a fire to make a warm and dry enough shelter. Or you might be in certain circumstances where you need that fire to be able to purify your water by boiling. So fire can go up on that list as a higher priority. But I do like to think of shelter, water, fire, food as a general guideline. But of course, if you brought a tent and sleeping bag, then you might not need to worry about shelter. You might be thinking about, all right, how am I going to get my clean water to drink?
Totally. And fire, whether or not it's essential, it just makes everything so much more fun. It's the difference between surviving and enjoying your night, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a huge key survival skill, not just for shelter and water and cooking food that might not be edible until it's cooked, but also signaling rescuers. Like all my friends who work in search and rescue, they're like, what's the fastest way to help searchers find you? Like, build a giant smoky fire, especially during the day. I mean, aircraft looking for you will see that billow of smoke from miles away, and they'll be able to send ground crews to find you really quickly. But also fire creates that psychological comfort. Like another thing that people don't think about as much and about survival is the psychology of it. Especially if you're being by yourself and alone, that path of panic can be the most deadly thing. Like if you start freaking out and letting that worry and fear and panic take over your state of mind, it can lead even experienced outdoors people to make terrible decisions, like jumping off of cliffs or running in the middle of the night, doing things that you shouldn't be doing. And so the most important survival skill or survival tool is what's between your two ears, your brain. So keeping that level head or positive mental attitude or upright mind, however you want to describe it, the will to survive, but that ability to stay calm, cool, and clear-headed and make good decisions. But then, fire is, like I said, fire can do so much for you that I think everybody, even if you're experienced survivalists, especially if you're brand new, like, I don't smoke, but I carry a lighter in my pocket everywhere I go. And I mean, it's like a survival kit that weighs almost nothing. I like the translucent one so you can tell how much fuel is left in it. And then I've got a backup way to make fire in my pocket all the times. I carry a pocket knife, a folding knife, just for like utility tasks around the farm. But inside the handle is a ferro rod, which is like a modern day flint and steel. So, and it doesn't matter if it gets wet, still works just fine. So even without having a backpack with survival gear in it, I have two ways of making fire that are on my person at all times. And that's how much I value fire. And yes, I can go make a friction fire, but in a real emergency situation, I'd want an even faster way to do it, which is why I carry those things. And it's something simple that everybody can do. And if I have to fly in an airplane and give up my lighter, the first thing I buy when I get off is like a cheap lighter, throw in my pocket for wherever I'm traveling to.
Yeah, the story about fire reminds me when I was in that same teen program. This was a few years later than when Justin had started. I think Justin may have been 19 at this point. I was 16 or 17. And there was a handful of us that had really gotten into fire by friction. And I mean, we were trying to really master it. I think at this point, Justin's lighter, quote unquote, was he literally had a 4-inch tall hand drill set that he could start within 8 seconds, And so his whole thing was, I don't need a lighter. I've got one. So that was my roommate. And I always felt like, that same fire, or energy of competition, because I'm sitting there, proud that I can get my hand drill going at all, and Justin's doing it in 8 seconds, But we were at that time, still going to school every morning at Malalia Chui, which was a Kamba style hut in Western Washington. And it had a dirt floor, and you had to start a fire by friction there every single morning. And it had gotten to the point, this was in right around this time of year, it was in February. And the same 5 of us had started every single fire the entire school year. And there were 15 of us in the class at the time. So one Monday morning, we come walking in, and it had been raining and snowing all weekend. So it had been like 4 days straight of snow, and then it had rained for the last 24 hours. So the entire forest was just saturated, and there was like chunks of wet snow dripping and sloughing off the cedar trees and the hemlocks as you were out there. And it was just like one of those days. If you've never been to Western Washington, it's like the entire air that you're breathing is wet. It's not just wet ground. It's like wet everything. It's unbelievable. And so we come walking up at 9 a.m, and our teacher tells the 5 of us who are used to making fire, hey, you 5 can't come in today until you've made a fire out here. You have to start from scratch. You can use what you got on you, and you got to make a fire out here. And then to the other 10, he told them, well, you guys have to start the fire inside. Luckily, my friend Eric was very well prepared all the time, and he had a piece of nylon cord that he kept around his ankle like an anklet all the time for a bow drill cord, because we could make one out of a cedar root. But man, those cedar roots break and they break and they break, and it's just, it's doable, but it's no fun at all. And the rest of us had knives on us, and we got right to work, talking about that mindset. We were all ready to just go, okay, what can I do right now from right here, And so the 5 of us got our heads together, and we went out and we found our materials, and we made a bow drill set from scratch from cedar. And we literally took branches as big around as our forearms, and we carved them all the way down to the spindle, so the wood at the center was dry, right? And we made our fireboard, and we made everything, and then we did the same thing to get our actual tinder. We found some dry bark, inner bark, to kind of get the coal to sit on. But then when we started making the fire, we did the same thing where we had cedar shavings from the very inside of the wood, right? We had carved all the heavy outside out. Boy, thankfully we had knives, right? Because without that, this would have just been, pretty near impossible. Anyway, it took us about 2 hours to get our fire going, but we beat the other 10. So that felt pretty good, And it's just that reminder, right, that when you get that mindset and you work on those skills and then you have them tested, it's like if you can stay grounded and you can stay centered, you can figure it out, And, for me as an adult now, I haven't found myself in survival situations very often. I haven't, most of my adulthood work has been in the world of music, but boy, is it just kind of the same thing. It's being able to be present and grounded and up against reality, right? Like you can't fake knowing how to make a fire. It's either going to light or it's not going to light, And, for any of you who are sitting out there listening right now and thinking, oh, is this something I want to try? Boy, give it a try. It is just so satisfying. It's such a journey to get to, and just the pride and sort of the inner confidence you develop from that, I think is unmatched.
Yeah, I think it gives you the confidence to tackle so many things. Like like you said, when something comes up in another aspect of your life and it seems impossible, your mind starts to go like, all right, what are the steps I'm going to do that we're going to get there? Like how are we going to figure this out? And you just believe in your resourcefulness and those around you, and it's just I love that survival mentality of that will to solve problems and challenges. But yeah, it reminds me around a similar time, Aiden, I think it was one of the times we went on a trek down to Cedar Falls, and I was with I think Justin and Greg. I can't remember who else was with us at the time, but they were like in shorts and barefoot or something like that. And it's a few miles to get out there when we hiked from Lake Margaret. And on the way back, this rainstorm came in and soaked us. And we're like, we really do need a fire. And so we were doing the whole bow drill kit thing. And it took us about an hour to, carve up a kit and get a fire going, but there's an old saying that those that chop their own wood are warmed twice. And it's so true for friction fire too. Those that make their own friction fire are warmed twice as well, burning through all those cedar roots and such. And It reminds me, like with the 9-month classes I used to run, we would start at the beginning, making bow drill kits from lumber we had picked up at the hardware store that's like perfectly kiln dry, no knots, straight grained, and then it's moving on to having them make it from branches from the woods. And then a few months later, it's like, okay, now you're going to be making it from stone tools. You're going to break apart stones and then carve your kit with stone tools, and you're going to use rootlets. So that at the end of the year, they're ready for a survival trip where they go out for 5 days with just the clothes on their back, not even a knife. And they make the stone tools, and they use the stone tools to make the friction fire kits. They then make all their implements and burn bowls, and they start purifying their water and cooking their food. And it's just amazing that they can just do it with such ease by the end of a school year when they've like put in the time over the course of a year to gain these skills and practice them.
Wow, I'm feeling inspired and remembering the satisfaction of sleeping in my first debris hut overnight, and that I was actually really so warm I didn't even want the door on. And that just hearing you share that consistent experience for other people, it's really heartwarming, that sense of realizing that I am capable of surviving, on this planet, right, on this earth without anything, which is, of course, our natural way of being. Watching people find that in themselves is really, really beautiful. So, Jason, do you have anything coming up that people might be able to join to get some of this experience from you?
Yeah. So one of the things I was going to mention is, I ran these college courses, we call them, for 20 years, 9-month courses, training instructors. And, but simultaneously to that, we did a lot of courses for the public, a lot of weekend classes that anybody could come to, so that you didn't have to take away 9 months of your life to learn from us. And one of our most popular courses of those weekend classes for the public was a weekend survival course, where we took kind of the core skills that anyone should really have if you're a human being on planet Earth, or especially if you're hiking and camping, spending time in the outdoors. And so we ran these weekend survival courses, almost every month for a couple decades. And then as time went on, we would get lots of inquiries, a lot of folks asking us, would you create an online version of it? Because people would discover us from all over the world, and a lot of them weren't local here to the Northwest, and traveling out here could be a barrier for some folks. And so they asked if we could put all that training into an online version so they could have access to it. And so we did that a number of years back. So we have this course called the Essential Wilderness Survival Skills. It's been incredibly popular over the last 5 or 6 years, been one of our most popular courses. And so it takes all that magic of like basics of shelter building, friction fire making, water purification, wild edibles applicable to all of North America, all those survival skills that you would want to have, that everybody should have in their back pocket. And so that's going to be available this week for folks listening to this podcast. We're going to put it at a big discount so that you can join, you can get those skills, you can share them with your family, you can share them with your friends. And so it's got myself and our other instructional team. It's got quite a few different video modules and lessons you can go practice, and you can ask questions of the instructors, and we've got some extra bonuses for folks. So yeah, we've got this offer going this week. So if folks want to jump on that, that's an opportunity to get into these skills or add some more skills to your toolkit, or see how we teach it and share it with others. But or if you want to gift it to a family member who you want to have these skills. It's been a really popular course for folks to use with like kids they're homeschooling, that type of a thing. But we'll have that there and up for folks right now as this is airing and for the next few days.
And you'll be able to find a link in the show notes as well. That'll take you right there if you're interested.
Great. Well, that was wonderful storytelling and reliving for me, really just going back and over the years here and just seeing what all three of you have done, and the things that you've all endeavored to do in your journeys, and how this journey of connection with all the beings and elements around us, and connection more thoroughly with ourselves through that process and other people, has been really a blessing, to each of you, but how much you've all helped so many other people. So I'm really grateful to be here and to witness you all, and to know when I'm too old to do this kind of stuff anymore, the next generation is well covered. Thank you, Jason, Aiden, Sarah.
Oh, thanks, Jon. Thank you all too. Thank you, Jon, very much for all you've done for this movement over the many decades, longer than I've been alive. You've just done so much to inspire so many generations, and to get this knowledge out and get these schools going all over the place, and all the work you've done on other continents, the books you've put together. I'm just inspired in how you've just been a role model of how you can keep moving further and doing more and reaching new people and audiences. And yeah, it's something to aspire to. And I hope that the things that I'm doing today are doing that for the next generation. That's what I'm always thinking about. The glass is half full and half empty. Like, I'm inspired by how far we've come and how many nature schools there are all around the country and world now. But at the same time, our environmental problems are still bigger than ever. And our challenges looking ahead to how we become more connected to nature and to each other, and have inner peace and peace with each other and with the planet around us, it's ever more concerning. And so we can feel proud of the work we've done, but also know we've got a long way to go, and we need more of us, helping move this forward, and so that we can have that healthier future that we all want for our kids and our grandkids, and the future beyond that.
Yeah, good point. So let's just work together and just crank out many more instructors, all of us here. We need them. And you know what? I also want to just pause for a moment and just, offer gratitude for the likes of Ingwe and Tom Brown. I couldn't have done what I did without them, so here they're ancestors now. But, how I know how much it means to those of us who care about this, that there's people who really care and are committed out there doing this good work. And, I think the one reason that that's important is something that Jason referred to earlier. So for the listeners, what Jason said, that if you go far enough on this nature journey and you interact with the earth enough with these skills, you realize that you have to change your footprint on the earth. And that is just true of everyone I have ever known who's ever gone on this journey. They want to do things like learn permaculture and reduce their impact, and they want to be helpful and tend the land and help others learn, so that's the reason. It's not just so that, yes, it would really help if you were in a survival situation. These things will help you for sure. But there's that whole other side that, we got to regenerate this earth and help the future generations. It's such an urgent call. So yeah, thank you for that. And I really appreciate everyone following us on Tracking Connections podcast, and look forward to our next episode and our next chance to visit with Jason.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Tracking Connections. If you enjoy this podcast, it would mean a lot to us if you would take a minute to follow or subscribe. Following the podcast helps us, and it helps you, because you'll never miss an episode. We'd also love for you to give us a 5-star rating and review, and share an episode with a friend. To learn more about our current offerings, visit livingconnectionfirst.net. We'll see you next time.